Hi, this is Comptroller Brooke Learman welcoming you to the Maryland Association of Counties Conduit Street Podcast, the show that discusses the issues and ideas shaping Maryland policy and politics today.
Hi, Kevin Canale here, and welcome to a special episode of the Conduit Street Podcast. This week, we're sharing audio from a dynamic session at the MACo Winter Conference, where leaders from the executive branch and the Maryland General Assembly join county officials to discuss the fiscal and policy challenges ahead of the 2025 session. Led by 2025 MACo President and Queen Anne's County Commissioner Jack Wilson, the panel explored how critical issues like education reform, energy, and housing will impact counties and their role in shaping Maryland's future. With the General Assembly session now underway, we'll be back next week and throughout the session with updates, analysis, and everything counties need to stay informed. Stay tuned, and we'll talk to you next week. All right, good morning, and welcome to the MACo Winter Conference session, the 2025 General Assembly forecast. I am Kevin Canale. Our session today is sponsored by DMI Incorporated. It is now my honor to introduce your 2025 MACo president. Hopefully you didn't see him sing karaoke last night. I heard it was quite the show. Queen Anne's County Commissioner Jack Wilson, who will moderate this panel for us today. Commissioner Wilson, thank you.
Where's that in the script? I added. That's the significant. It really does say I sang bad in the script. Welcome, everyone. We're honored to have with us today the key voices from the Maryland's legislative leadership, majority, minority leaders from the Senate and the House, along with Governor Moore's administration. With the 2025 legislative session shaping up to be a challenging one, marked by tough fiscal decisions and significant policy debates, our panel will provide invaluable insights into what's on the horizon in Annapolis. So, quick bios. I'm going to introduce our speakers, and they'll raise their hands as if we don't know who they are already. We got Eric Luedtke, serves as the Chief Legislative Officer, and also another position now, I understand, right? That's not
I was until Wednesday.
Yeah, that changed last Wednesday. So, for Governor Westmore, and in that role, he serves as a policy advisor and liaison between the Governor and General Assembly. Former teacher, college professor, and member of the Maryland House of Delegates, where he served as Majority Leader. Next, we have Delegate David Moon, is the Majority Leader in the Maryland House of Delegates, with his own fan club. Very nice. He has served in the House since 2015, representing District 20 in Montgomery County. He sits on the House Judiciary Committee, and prior to being named Majority Leader, served as the committee vice chair from 2021 to 2023. And then next, we have my very own Senator Steve Hershey.
Yes, Steve.
Represents Caroline, Cecil, Kent, and the Queen Anne's County on the Upper Eastern Shore. He was initially elected to the House of Delegates in 2010 and subsequently appointed to the Maryland Senate in 2013. He's been a member of the Senate Finance Committee for the last 9 legislative sessions. Senator Hershey served as Minority Whip for 6 years and now serves as the Senate Minority Leader. Next, we have Delegate Jesse Pippy. He is the Minority Whip in the Maryland House of Delegates, where he represents District 4, serving Carroll and Frederick counties. He also serves on Economic Matters Committee and the House Rules and Executive Nominations Committee. And finally, we have Senator Craig Zucker. Has served in the Maryland Senate since 2016, representing District 14, serving Montgomery County. He previously served in the House of Delegates from 2011 to 2016, and he currently sits on the Senate's Budget and Taxation Committee, which should be busy this year, the Spending Affordability Committee, and he chairs the Capital Budget Subcommittee, the Executive Nominations Committee, and serves as chair of the Senate Democratic Caucus. So with the introductions out of the way, we drew straws, and it looks like, Eric, you're up first. Yeah.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for that, Craig. I appreciate it. I'm actually, I'll stand up if that's okay. Yeah. So good to see everyone again this year. I'm Eric Luedtke. For those of you I haven't met, the new title is Senior Policy Advisor. It's because I'm going grayer, so senior. I'm actually, and this is going to sound like a shock, I'm looking forward to this session. We have a lot of very difficult problems on the horizon this session. And I think we've got the right people in place to fix them. We've got a governor who believes deeply in partnership and in working with other people. We've got a legislature that is humming on all cylinders. We've got local government leadership that's deeply engaged in the conversations in Annapolis. And one of the things that I'm very proud of serving in the government of the state of Maryland is that Maryland always gets it done. We've been through tough budget times before. We went through them in 2007, 2008, 2009, up through 2011. We went through them in 2014. And we always get through them. And we always get through them and build a state that is better as a result of it. And I think that's what's going to happen this year. We are facing, as DLS has pointed out, as the governor mentioned again last night, the single most challenging budget environment for the state in at least 20 years. $2.7 billion one-year deficit, plus a structural deficit in the out years. Added to that is the uncertainty of what's going to happen at the federal level, and how many of the threats to Maryland's economy that have been floated at the federal level are actually going to be carried through. And so it is a very complex environment we're having these conversations in. And as the governor pointed out last night, the worst thing we could do in that situation is to kick the can down the road. And he's not willing to do that. So on January 15th, he's going to introduce his budget. That budget will be the subject of, I think, probably it'll be the subject of the most debate of any issue during the legislative session. And he previewed for you last night some of the ways he's thinking about the budget. Key to Maryland's long-term success and to preventing these types of deficits from happening again is our effort to strengthen Maryland's economic situation, our economic growth. As the governor pointed out, we cannot continue to rely solely on the federal government as the driver of economic growth in the state of Maryland. We've known that for a long time, but the response to that too often by policymakers, including, myself at times, has been an approach that the governor describes as the peanut butter approach. You put a little bit of money into tons of economic development programs without necessarily providing the type of economic growth you need. And that's what he's trying to get away from. You may recall a couple of years ago when he was running for office, he talked a little bit about how Maryland is asset rich, but strategy poor. So the governor is in the process, starting last night, of rolling out his economic development strategy for the next few years. And he mentioned the targeted investments that he and his administration are planning to make in several key sectors. He mentioned as well the upcoming executive order. And so we are looking to partner with you all in local governments as we continue to move forward on those efforts. And then I would add that in addition to the budget and revenue conversations, the economic growth conversations that we're going to be having in session, there are always many more issues that crop up. I think energy, and I'm sure Senator Hershey is going to talk about this a little bit because it's a subject close to his heart. Energy is probably going to be the second most talked about issue during the legislative session in all of its many implications. Energy generation, transmission, the data center debates about energy prices, clean energy goals, all are going to be part of that conversation. And then you'll see, as well as there are every year, continuing conversations about public safety, about education, and the other issues where state and local government interact. And I think the one other thing I want to draw out from you all from the governor's speech last night, because it was the first time he's talked about it publicly, the governor's introducing an education bill this session. It relates to the blueprint. I want to caution everyone in this room and everybody who's active in these conversations in Annapolis. I think it's time we stop thinking about the blueprint as a separate thing. The blueprint at this point is the education policy of the state of Maryland. And that means a number of things. It means, first of all, that we cannot be so beholden to the original plan, and I'm one of the crafters of the original plan. We cannot be so beholden to the original plan that we are scared to do anything to make it better, to alter it as we encounter challenges. We cannot ignore the fact that the blueprint was written prior to the pandemic and that the world of education has radically changed since the pandemic. And we cannot continue to pretend that the blueprint is somehow separate from our larger conversations about the interactions of state and local government, about state budget, about all of the other major issues in Annapolis. It is not a standalone issue. It is a core part of what we need to do in Annapolis. And so the governor is going to be proposing some shifts in the blueprint. And he will announce those in detail as the bill gets introduced. But I'll preview, and he talked about it a little bit last night, the view that he's taken in the blueprint conversation, which I think is the view that many of you in this room take, that we need to make changes to make implementation better, right? The blueprint, the original blueprint plan, our education policy calls for a number of changes in our education system over time. We need to make changes to that implementation to do a better job. And in the process of doing that, we will find that we're not always spending money in the right place all the time. The collaborative time piece was a large part of that. I noticed when he started talking about collaborative time, the people in the room who are education policy people were paying very close attention, and many of the other people in the room were a little confused at times, which is okay. It's a little wonky. Collaborative time is one of the best policies that the blueprint proposed. It recognizes that teachers are not machines. They are people. They are professionals. They need time to work together within the school day. We simply do not have enough teachers in the state of Maryland to implement collaborative time right now. And we need to be willing to have those tough conversations and point out those tough facts as we go through this session. So it's going to be a very busy year. And I hope a year where we are able to set Maryland on a really strong path for the next few years. And I look forward to the questions and to hearing what my former colleagues in the legislature have to say.
Next up, we have Delegate Moon.
Good morning, everybody. Delegate David Moon from Montgomery County, but I am here actually representing the entirety of the House at this point, and that is here also specifically for Speaker Adrian Jones this morning. So this time last year at this very panel, I was urging that we not kick the can down the road on the state budget and that we take real action to address what we saw was coming. I had also assumed that the problem was not going to fix itself, and indeed all indicators could be that it would get worse if we came back a year later having done nothing. So as we come to this point and we see where we are, my message is pretty much exactly the same, that we need to roll up our sleeves, do the hard work, make the tough decisions, and not kick the can down the road. It is my hope that whatever this conversation is, it is one that is looking at the out years and not just a short-term Band-Aid fix to this problem that is going to have me coming every year having this exact same type of conversation with all of you lovely folks. But it looks like things are beginning to swim in that direction. So I want to quote the House Appropriations Chair, Ben Barnes, here as we begin the budget season and the budget conversations, that the House has a very high bar for changes to the blueprint. And as it's noted, the blueprint at this point is our education policy and our school funding formulas in the state of Maryland. So with that, I look forward to what that budget conversation is going to lead to. But I also want to talk about the state budget from a longer term perspective and just suggest that whether Trump was in office or whether Harris was in the White House, essentially, if we are smart about things, we play the cards pretty much the same with respect to shoring up the state's tax base. And so, again, I'm certain some deal is going to emerge. It must, in fact, for us to get through the next year to handle the short-term budget and the 2-year situation. And that's already a monumental task, into the billions. But as I noted, if we really want to start talking about the out years, this is probably the best place to do it with our county partners. So I've been looking at a number of indicators about the condition of the state. I again will refer everyone back to the Comptroller's State of the Maryland Economy report that was issued, I think, January or so of this year. But one data point jumps out and alarms me. It is the state's stagnant population and the fact that in the last 3 years, we've been at negative growth or stagnant growth. And when you look at the DMV region, where I'm from, which we do pride ourselves on considering ourselves an economic engine for the state, we have similar parallel problems in Montgomery and Prince George's. When I look at other, and that's the most alarming one, we still continue to have multiple vacancies for every existing worker in the state. You see this in healthcare and across the board in all of the sectors. We are not producing workers at a rate that is sustainable. And apparently, there's plans to get immigrant workers out of here and out of the workforce also. So let's not forget the crab picking season shenanigans that we witnessed in past years. So the worker shortage, intricately tied to our flatline population. And I believe when you look at what the number one inflationary concern of many Maryland households, especially in the DMV and other areas, it's housing cost. So this is my message and my ask to you this year. Let's all begin together planning for the out years and stopping the shrink of our tax base. Before we get to any of the other policies, a declining population is not where we want to be. We have cities from Western Maryland to Baltimore where we have seen what population decline looks like and what it does to the tax base and the squeeze it puts on the existing residents and businesses to make up those shortfalls through ever tougher decisions. So this is policy point number one. It's something we can all participate in solving. And again, this is not going to be something that materializes on next year as a line item or in a fiscal note. But if we are I'm right now looking at everything from 6 remaining years of the Moore administration to try and get some of these goals achieved. And reversing our population decline, starting with housing growth, I think is a very good place. And I told the House Minority Counterpart, Jesse Pippy, that I was sad to see him. But I've actually been talking for 2 years now with Jason Buckle, the House Minority Leader, about this, and I do believe he agrees on this point about the state and population growth. So where else are we looking at these kinds of indicators? Energy prices are going to jump coming up pretty soon, and people are sort of wondering what the heck we're going to do about it. Okay, we're going to have to handle that again in the short term. But in the out years, our in-state production of energy lags other states that don't have fancy things like renewable portfolio standards. And so just from the hard look at in-state production, we are not doing it. There's resistance from many in our communities to citing these projects. Again, I will look at this on a 6-year run that we need to get serious and put real numbers and goals and metrics down for in-state energy production. And we are all going to have to be partners in getting some real solutions there. I'll throw another one at you. Childcare. We have a real problem producing childcare at the moment, despite all of our efforts to scale up. So again, we're forced to deal with this in the short run. But looking at this at a longer 6-year time run, we and the counties, state and the counties, must be partners in figuring this out. And again, we have siting and zoning challenges coming from some of our local partners. And all of this is hurting the bottom line of our tax base. So again, I'm very glad that it looks like the discussion is beginning, at least for the short term, to get some of the tough decisions out of the way. But again, for this longer conversation, I do hope we are talking about longer term fixes. And again, I please ask the county partners here, really think about what we're talking about here. All of these shortages are things that impact all of our constituents. They are seeing them now, and they are underlying a lot of the inflationary worries about what's going on. Housing, energy, childcare. You cannot deny the problem. And you cannot deny that we can all, without cost to the taxpayers, make policy changes that will improve these numbers. Zoning reform can unlock the value of land, add to our tax base, and induce people to invest their own money in the state. And it will add to our population and add to our workers. So let's hope we can do this collaboratively. If not, I think a number of my colleagues are introducing bills that take a little bit more interesting and aggressive approaches to some of these problems that we've seen attempted in other states. So again, that's sort of an opening conversation for what I hope is a collaborative effort for all of us to start putting real numbers up on the board. Thank you.
Next up, we have Senator Hershey.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here in front of such a great crowd for an early Friday morning. I think I'll start a little bit with some of the parts of the governor's speech last night. And I certainly appreciated a lot of the things that he did say. I think one of the important things in his message was that we cannot tax our way out of this budget scenario that we have. And I think that's very important to recognize that as you talk to people, you talk to your constituents and those in the community, the last thing they want to see is increased taxes. I mean, Maryland is already overburdened with the amount of taxes that they pay. So we've got to be able to fix this problem without raising taxes. And I think one of the things you have to recognize is that any realistic path out of debt has to rely on growth. And we've heard about growth in population. We've heard about growth in the economy. Both of those combined need to be the path that Maryland sets itself out on. And I think the governor did have some ideas that we can all get behind, but mainly when it talks about the economy, what can we do to increase Maryland's presence, to get new jobs to come to Maryland, to retain the jobs that we have, and be able to bolster the businesses in Maryland. And unfortunately, a lot of the reasons why why companies are not coming to Maryland for business is because of our tax policy and because of our regulations and because of the things that year after year after year we have passed in the General Assembly to make it unfriendly for businesses to come to Maryland. And those of you that are working in counties and economic development have all recognized this. You've all been able to talk to people that want to be here. I mean, Maryland is a great place to live. And they want to be here, they want to do business, but then they start looking at the policies that are in place and they start to look elsewhere. And we have lost business after business after business to Northern Virginia, to now areas in Pennsylvania and even Delaware, the surrounding areas, let alone the South, where we have lost a number of our type of manufacturing jobs that would normally be something that Maryland would try to attract. And again, these are all because of the policies that we created. I think it was about 10 years ago under Speaker Bush and President Miller, we started the Augustine Commission, and it was a real deep dive into Maryland's business climate and the competitiveness of Maryland. And from that, we came up with a number of suggestions on what we had to do to be more friendly and more attractive to businesses. We need to dust off that report. We need to take a better look at it and see what some of those suggestions were. But unfortunately, one of the things that ring out the most that I remember, and this came from Moody's, which is one of the bond rating companies, and they said it's not just what the policies are now, but it's the propensity for the Maryland legislature to create policies that were unfriendly to business. And I think that's what we've seen more than anything. It's policy after policy after policy that we've created in Maryland that continue to make it unattractive. And one of the things that we don't do well enough in Maryland, and it was mentioned a little bit with economic development, is we don't evaluate the programs and policies that we passed a few years after. And I appreciate the governor's and Eric's recognition of that with respect to the blueprint. But that has to be a more holistic approach. We have to look at that, a lot of different policies. What have we created 5 years ago, 3 years ago? Are those policies still working? Are they doing what we thought they were going to do? Or have they had some type of negative impact? And if they've had a negative impact, then we need to get rid of them. If they've had a positive impact, then we need to evaluate them and see if there's things that we can make to grow and be more positive with that. So I think that's a big thing that we'll have to take a look at as we're broadly looking at the budget and what the concerns are. With respect to the economy, the Maryland Chamber of Commerce puts out the Red Book. And if you haven't seen it, it is just a small book with nothing but numbers in it, nothing but stats on where Maryland ranks with respect to all other states in a number of different categories. And one of the most telling charts that they have is the creation of private sector jobs. And Maryland ranks 49th. 49th. And that is something that we are definitely going to have to work on to find out why can we not create the jobs here in Maryland. Governor spoke last night about the over-reliance on federal jobs. And the Trump administration is going to come in and they're going to take a look at the size of government, and there are going to be some changes. And there are going to be some changes that affect Maryland in probably ways that they're not going to affect other states. But Trump administration is doing the same thing that we need to do, and that is to find and redetermine the size of government. Governor's talked about filling vacancies in jobs. We've said, hey, that might be fine if those jobs are necessary. And we've asked them very specifically, show us the departments that are not providing the level of service that we feel the citizens need. And if those departments need to fill jobs, then let's look at that. But let's not just look at a number and say there is 10,000 vacancies, therefore we need to put 10,000 new people back in jobs. That's not the way that you handle government. So we're hoping to be able to work with the governor on things like that as well. One of the other things, again, with respect to tax policy, Governor mentioned last night, Maryland is very low in unemployment, 2.9% in unemployment. Yet revenue from income taxes is down. So what that's telling us is that everybody is working, but we're getting less money because a lot of the high-paying jobs and people that are making high incomes are leaving the state of Maryland. And we've known that for years. We've seen that through Governor O'Malley's millionaire tax that he imposed. We've seen it through a number of different policies. Those that have the ability to leave Maryland and pick up residence somewhere else are doing so. We have to make sure that we can retain those people. We have to make sure that we are, again, making Maryland a place that they want to stay, that they want to create, and they want to run their businesses. So that's another issue. Again, energy has been talked about, and again, it's been mentioned. I think it will be probably the second biggest topic that we deal with. Maryland's in an energy crisis right now. There's no other way to say it. As a net importer of energy, which means that Maryland has to get more energy from outside the state than we actually produce. We are in a very vulnerable position when you have states like Pennsylvania that are still doing fracking, that are creating energy through natural gas, that you have states like Virginia, that is the data center capital of the world, that is absorbing as much energy as possible, and yet we're sitting in the middle. And we've unfortunately allowed the environmental advocates like League of Conservation Voters and Sierra Club to dictate our energy policy over the last 10 years. And when they dictate our energy policy, they do so without regard to the impact of ratepayers and without regard to reliability. And those are our two big problems right now. Delegate Moon mentioned the cost of energy. The cost of energy is up because of the policies that have been created in the Maryland General Assembly. There's no other reason for that. When PJM came out with their recent capacity prices, it was because of the recognition that there was not enough generation in the state of Maryland. And I don't know how we're going to get there. I mean, in order to get to, we're not going to build a new nuclear power plant, although everybody's now talking about nuclear and how they're supporting it. And I think that's very kind, knowing that those projects are 10, 12 years away. But that's not an immediate solution. Yes, we can do some things at Calvert Cliffs to upgrade and get some additional capacity, but that's not the immediate solution. We've got to be able to look at bringing gas back to the state of Maryland. We have got to look at generation of electricity from gas. Now, that means that the environmental community is going to have to accept pipelines and bring gas in the state, and they're going to fight tooth and nail over that. And we need legislators that are going to stand up to that and say that we need to make sure that our state doesn't have to rely as extensively on other states in order to meet our energy and reliability requirements. We've talked about solar here forever and the siting of solar projects. And there's a very great policy panel that discussed that yesterday. Solar is unfairly being required on the burdens of the rural counties. And every one of you that have been in these sessions, especially from rural counties, have said, we don't like the fact that some unelected board of individuals up in Baltimore are determining where and how much solar we have to absorb in our counties. And now we're talking about housing as well. And then when they talk about zoning reform means the state of Maryland is going to tell the counties where we're going to put housing. That's what zoning reform is. Okay, zoning reform is no longer the counties having the ability to say, hey, here's where we want growth and what type of growth we want. It's going to be very similar to what goes on with solar. We have to make sure, you guys have to make sure as counties that you're pushing back on that. I mean, if there's anything on why we have counties and why we have municipalities, it's with respect to zoning and being able to determine how your counties and how the municipalities want to grow. We don't want the state dictating those types of things. And that's what they've done with solar. And be careful, that's what they're talking about when doing with housing as well. And finally, again, we appreciate education. We've talked about that enough with the blueprint and where we are with that. Again, we appreciate the counties that have all gone through their programs on how they want to implement the blueprint, what they have delivered to the AIB. And it's been very important for the AIB to take a look at that, and now for the governor to take a look at that and say simply some things that we can't afford within the blueprint. And I do think that we will stretch that out. Again, it is the policy of the state of Maryland. I don't necessarily agree with a one-size-fits-all type of policy, the way the blueprint was created, but we do need more impact back from the counties on how they can implement that. And I think that has shown that the counties have spoken up and saying these are the things that make sense in each individual counties. And then hopefully the General Assembly will be able to take a look at that and be able to modify the blueprint as we go forward. So again, I think it's going to be a very interesting session. Again, I am always go into these things being optimistic that we can solve our problems. I do think that we have a great group of legislators in Annapolis. We might sit on different sides of the aisle, but we do collaborate and work together. I think people will see that we are friendly with each other. We enjoy each other's company for 90 days down in Annapolis, but I think we all have our very specific points and ideas that we want to get across. And hopefully at the end of this 90-day legislative session, we've made these decisions that are for best for the people of Maryland. Thank you.
Delegate Pippy.
So I too want to welcome everyone here this morning. It's great to see so many faces. I got to tell you, we have some big issues this year. Big issues. Budget. We haven't seen a budget deficit like this since the Great Recession. We have big discussions on education, which coincides with the budget issues we're facing. We have an energy crisis in our state, which was mentioned by the minority leader in the Senate. We're still dealing with the impact of inflation. I mean, at the end of the day, all of these things have impacts on everyday hardworking Maryland taxpayers. It's becoming simply unaffordable to live in our great state. And what you get with that is you get people voting with their feet. You get people leaving. You get people with means, with businesses, with other opportunities, seeking out neighboring states. I always use the example that I live in Frederick. I'm 10 miles from Pennsylvania, 10 miles from West Virginia, 10 miles from Virginia, and I'm an hour and a half away from Annapolis. But all three of those states have a much better economic plan than we do. Let's talk about the budget. $2.7 billion deficit. With just over 6 million people in our state, that's about 500,000 per person in our state. How do we fill that? It's not going to be filled with putting alcohol in grocery stores. I'll tell you that. It's a serious issue. There's two ways to raise revenue. You can raise taxes and you can cut expenses. I'm actually grateful to hear that the governor is considering making changes to Blueprint. I will say that in the minority caucuses, we've been saying that for years. It was never policy driven. I think there's definitely some merit to that legislation. It was always the cost. And that's been the biggest challenge. And I think you hear that echoed by our county counterparts as well, that it's simply unaffordable. This year's budget deficit is nearly $3 billion. When you add in Blueprint next year, it's an insane amount. It's unworkable. So we do look forward to working with our colleagues across the aisle and the governor to make adjustments there for the benefit of our state. Energy. I represent Frederick County, and we got lots of problems. As it was mentioned, we are closing down power generating sources in our state, which is forcing us to import more energy at higher costs. We have a cliff of energy costs coming this year, meaning that for the everyday, hardworking, tax-paying Marylander, their energy costs are going to rise up to 30-40%. And the solution, it's not going to be solved with building windmills off the coast of Ocean City. It's not going to be solved with putting solar panels over fertile ground. We have real challenges there. In Frederick, there's been a significant debate of transmission lines, eminent domain, out-of-state companies building 70 miles worth of power lines by force, in some cases, mostly for the purpose of benefiting Virginia, but it begs the question, how are we going to get our energy? If we're closing coal power plants and we don't have the green energy sources creating enough energy, we yet have a significant problem, and that will just drive up costs. I think most people in the legislature, if not everyone, wants to do better by the people. We want to figure these things out. I hope that the majority party will work with the minority party on some of these solutions. I think they would agree that we've been kind of a broken record on some of these issues as far as the Blueprint, budget, spending. I will say this. Everyone in this room has a budget to manage. Everyone in this room has income coming in, income going out. The state government should be the same. The state leaders should have their same responsibility to manage their budget efficiently, effectively, and within their means. We can't simply continue to spend money we don't have. Everyone in this audience has to work within your means. The state government should do the same. As mentioned, when the Moore administration came in, there was a big discussion of filling pins, 10,000 vacant jobs. Were these jobs essential? We shouldn't be spending money just for the sake of spending money. I think the taxpayers want us to be responsible with their dollars, and that's an important mission that we have. And so I look forward to working with the Moore administration on their budget that will be introduced shortly. Last but not least, and I know it's going to be probably mentioned on here more, is this is a big session. This is probably one of the biggest sessions I've seen. This will be my 7th year coming down here as a legislator, and 2 years prior to that in another area. But I would think this is probably the biggest session of my time. And it's really important that legislators work together. There's 188 of us. We may not always agree on how to get there, but I think we all have what's best in mind for the state. And I hope that we can put the people first. We can be cognizant of the budget crisis, and I hope that we work with the federal government. That's really important. Maryland is extremely reliant on our federal partners, given our proximity to D.C. We can't afford to be suing the federal government. We can't afford to be slighting them. We need a partner now more than ever. For some of the infrastructure problems that we have in our state, we need the federal government to work with us. And I hope that the legislature and I hope that the Moore administration may put some political differences aside and work with the federal government for the betterment of our state. And I will be doing my part to keep moving Maryland in the right direction. So thank you very much.
And then finally, Senator Zucker.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's interesting as I was smiling all morning, feeling very joyful. And then I heard about, budget issues. I heard about energy policy. I heard about 160,000 jobs potentially leaving Maryland if Trump decreases jobs. And then I thought of like the commercial going, well, I feel kind of joyful because I just saved 15% by changing my car insurance. Look, I did want to congratulate first, it's an honor to be part of this amazing panel. You've got some great Maryland leaders here. Appreciate, Mr. President, your leadership. But I wanted to, in particular, just salute my former teammate in District 14, at that time, Delegate Eric Luedtke, on his promotion to be a senior advisor. Maybe it's lateral, but I've always felt like I'm older than Eric, so the fact that his title is now senior makes me feel good. So, but I'm still older than him, but maybe he's more wise now and wiser than me. But look, it's interesting. I mean, we've got Maryland leaders in this room from all over the state of Maryland, and it's tough, right? And you're hearing about the budget issues that the state is facing. But if things were easy, we wouldn't need us here as leaders. Things are hard, and it requires strong leadership. And I couldn't be more confident with the leaders that are in this room and the fact that we're going to be able to be in this together and resolve the problems ahead of us. I feel very confident and optimistic about the future of the state of Maryland. This is where I'm raising my family, and this is where I'll continue raising my family. Yes, we have a revenue shortfall in future years that we haven't seen in the last last 20 years. But we're going to get through it. We're going to have to make some tough choices. There's going to be a lot of things on the table, but we're going to continue to protect what's important to us and make sure that we're continuing to make sure that Maryland diversifies and grows. This is something that may not be necessarily new to Maryland. It might be something that we haven't seen in a while, but we're going to get through it. We've got great leadership, but the most important thing is that we have common sense. That we have common sense and a calm approach to not having a knee-jerk reaction to what we have to do right now, but taking a more holistic approach of what needs to happen. And what I mean by that is, I heard, some of this is reactive too. So I heard, it being mentioned that we have filled 10,000 jobs in the state of Maryland. That helps our local economy. Those are the folks that are answering the phones when someone says, hey, I've lost my health insurance, or my son has severe developmental differences and I need someone to help navigate that. That's the person on the phone. And we talk about maybe eliminating 160,000 federal jobs that impacts $2 billion worth of economic activity in the state of Maryland. Those jobs might be shipped to another state. Yeah, that matters. I think we fundamentally look at, and I feel this, Steve and Jesse and David and Eric, that, and you all feel it as elected officials, that sometimes we're looked at as like a public building, that we're just like property and that we're just not real people. And I think sometimes we have that sense of our state and county employees that, it's just this obscure person on the other line, but these are people that actually helping toward the economy and helping to make a difference in the lives of Marylanders. But what I want to say here today is that we will be putting forth the largest economic stimulus bill in the state of Maryland this next session. It's going to create more than 14,000 direct jobs and put more than $2 billion into the local economy. And it's called the Maryland Capital Budget. And we're going to be investing in Eastern Shore. We're going to be investing in Western Maryland. We're going to be investing in Prince George's County. We're going to be investing in Montgomery County. We're going to be investing in District 4 in Frederick. And we're going to be creating jobs, and we're going to be investing in organization and non-for-profits across the state. And the one thing that I want to the most important thing that I want to leave this conference, the message is, and Senator Hershey and I are like this on the Senate floor, is that you can disagree without being disagreeable. And the leaders in this room have become that much more important in today's environment. Whether you're Democrat or Republican, we have to take a leadership approach on how we work with one another. And I think you all see it. You see it at the conference. You know, we're breaking bread. We have to continue this. We have to realize that just because you disagree with someone doesn't mean that they're the enemy and that we shouldn't be communicating with them. So I look forward to working with my colleagues on making sure that we navigate the tough waters of the economy that we'll get through. We're all in the same ship together, and we refuse to sink. So I appreciate you providing me the opportunity to be here this morning, and enjoy the rest of the conference. And with that, feel free to also change car insurance if you need. Be happy.
All right, real quick, just want to take one more opportunity to thank all of our speakers for being here and taking time out of their busy schedules. And everybody's had about 35 minutes to come up with a good question for our panel, so the floor is open. Wow, look at the hands. There we go. Start right here.
Robert County, Harper County. I asked this question last year, maybe with the structural deficit was a little bit more of a theoretical construct, and now it appears to be more of a reality. But the last time we dealt with the structural deficit, 15, 20 some years ago, the county saw some significant hits. We assumed the normal cost would be pensions, 90% cut of highway user revenue, paid formula, community college, health departments were cut, local jail reimbursements, kind of going down the line, a whole bunch of cuts. So where did we expect maybe some of the local government share of this $2.7 billion? And again, and even if that's not so much a question of what individual things are going to be shared, but maybe what is the expectation of, what's our share of that pie?
So I'm going to start just because I'm using your question in part to respond to some of the things these other guys said a second ago, but also I'm going to get to your question. I promise. I do. And by the way, I forgot to say during my remarks, I thought you were great at karaoke last night, Jack. I thought it was fantastic. So these budget conversations are tough. I think they're made tougher when not everybody's on the same page in terms of facts and reality. And I think that we need to do a good job, all of us, checking each other on the set of facts that we're bringing to the conversation. So a couple things I want to point out. 2.7 billion divided by 6 million is not 500,000. It's 450. The personal income tax in the state of Maryland is not declining. It's still increasing. It's just, here, Bureau of Revenue Estimates report from yesterday. The FY24 actual personal income tax collections is 13.6 billion. The FY25 December estimate is 14.4 billion, and the FY26 estimate as of December is 14.8 billion. That's
we'll get the numbers on Tuesday.
Okay.
This is collaboration.
Yeah. Steve and I bicker like every time we see each other. And we've been dealing with structural deficits for a while. It's become sort of a fact of, how our budget projection process works. It's actually in some ways a good thing that we have entities like DLS and the BRE that are willing to be very clear about exactly what the state's at and what we're facing in the future if we don't make changes. So I believe it's 17 of the last 20 years, there's been a projected structural deficit going into session. What's different this year is scale, right? And it's scale because of a mismatch between the rate at which revenues are increasing, because revenues are still increasing. We're not in a recession right now, right? And the rate at which planned expenditures are increasing, right? It's just a larger number than normal. Now, you are right to point out that when we faced the Great Recession back in 2007, 2008 through 2011, there were a number of changes that were made that asked more of local governments. I don't think we're likely in this current discussion to see similar asks of a similar scale made of local governments, but local governments have to be part of the conversation, right? To the extent that we are bending the curve in terms of increases in state expenditures, a significant part of state expenditures is local aid. It's just a reality. The question then becomes, what are the priorities? And the governor will set forward some priorities in his budget. The legislature will amend them as they work through the legislative process. But what we really need from you all is to know what your priorities are. To the extent the state is going to have to find savings, or in most cases not cutting below last year's budget, but decreasing the rate of increase, right? What are local governments absolutely insisting cannot be cut, and what are local governments prioritizing slightly less high on that list? That's the conversation we need to be having as we're working through the budget process. But I don't think you're going to see something on the scale of the pension cost shift. I don't think you're going to see something on the scale of the significant cuts to local program open space funding. I mean, there's not a lot of program open space funding right now because transfer tax revenues aren't great, right? But that's another issue. So.
Anybody else want to chime in? Good. All right, next question.
Stephen Pereira, Calvert County CIO and long-time AI fanboy. The reason I say that is because I hear a lot of issues over and over, such as declining population and energy efficiency and the energy problem that we're about to encounter. And I wonder if we are too focused on the problems of the past and not the problems of tomorrow. So for the first time, we're seeing significant improvements in productivity. We're hearing that there's going to be offsets in jobs, and people like Elon Musk are saying in the future, working will be optional. And that might be a little bit too far, but it kind of makes me wonder, when we're too focused on things like population decline, will AI fill this role? Is this necessarily going to be a bad thing in the future? And what are we doing to ensure that we account not just for the problems of today, but for the problems of tomorrow? So particularly around energy, we're not going to produce all of these nuclear power stations and everything we need to do immediately. They take years to bring up online. And let's say in 10, 15 years, maybe that issue would have solved itself and we'd be left with a lot of unnecessary, outdated infrastructure.
There wasn't really a question, but maybe comment on the energy or something.
More of a statement.
5 people speechless.
I'm only jumping in because nobody else did. So you go. Feel free, Steve, if you want to jump in. I think it's a good point that we often spend more time responding. There's a saying. So I'm listening to a book right now about World War II because history nerd. There's a saying that whenever people fight a war, they're always fighting the last war, right? And I think the point you're making is similar. Whenever we try to solve a public policy problem, we're solving the last public policy problem, right? We're solving the last budget deficit. We're solving whatever it is. I think it is a valid, larger point that we need to figure out ways to do better adapting our policy making to changing technological and social circumstances. The AI issues are an important part of that. I think we're starting to see some of that. Right? Like, I think there is a noticeable difference between the pace of policy change that you saw in the legislature when I got there 15 years ago versus now. The legislature is aggressively taking on issues around AI. They're aggressively taking on sort of emergent policy issues all the time. I don't know that we can make policy based on stuff that's on a time horizon that's 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 years off, right? We don't yet know the full impacts that AI, for example, will have on society. And so we have to make policy choices in the moment that are based on what we know right now and what we know is going to happen over the short time horizon that's relatively certain. And, in this situation, to take AI as an example, that's energy. It really is, right? Like, it's the energy that's going into data centers, that's going into this industry is enormous, and it's going to have a significant impact on our energy infrastructure and our energy needs, and we need to figure out how to deal with that. That's, I think, the goal that's immediately in front of us at the moment. But longer term, who knows what the future may bring. And I think it's very difficult to predict. I always remember the story. The first time the space shuttle flew, it had 2 astronauts on it. One of them, his grandmother showed up. Now, his grandmother had been born in the 1880s. So she knew a time before automobiles. She grew up riding horse-drawn wagons, and here she was watching her grandson ride into space on the back of a rocket. We can't, the technological change happens so fast in the modern world that what we need to do as policymakers is remain as up to date on those issues as we can and those changes as we can, make policy changes as we can, but also accept the fact that there's only so far along the time horizon we can see.
Good.
Oh, sure. Now you want to jump in?
Yes.
I'll just. Yeah. Thank you for filling in for me. So briefly, I think I was one of a few legislators this past session that actually put in an AI bill. It was crime related, but it's my understanding there's going to be a very big package of AI bills this year to try to address some of those issues or concerns or adapting to the future. But just discussing what you mentioned, the reality is there's 6.5 million people in Maryland, and we have to address the needs of those individuals today. I mean, we always want to plan for the future, make adjustments. When we make decisions, consider the future, but we also have to address the needs of the 6.5 million people today. And sometimes that's challenging. A great example of that is in my committee, Economic Matters, which, by the way, will handle the AI issues. We talk about like electric vehicles, right? So, you would think everyone's driving an electric vehicle. In Maryland, there's 5 million registered vehicles, and 50,000 of those are electric. That's 1%. But, if we make a policy saying that every gas station has to have electric charging units, or we no longer allow the sale of gas-powered vehicles in our state starting in 2027, that has a significant impact on the 99% of other people that live in Maryland. And so I think it's important that we do have these robust discussions, and we talk about the future. But we also don't cut our nose off to spite our face. That the decisions that are made considering all the factors to the best of our ability within the 90 days. But we're also not putting people behind, and it's good to be progressive on some things, but not when it's detrimental. We can't get rid of energy production without having a backup, because otherwise what you end up with is skyrocketing energy costs on the average Marylander. And so this is part of that discussion that we have to death in Annapolis, in all the committees. But AI will certainly be a huge topic this year, and it is across the country. And by the way, it segues right into the data centers, which then segues into we don't have enough energy going to the data centers, So it's a lot. So good question. We good? Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else? No?
Thank you. Christiana Rigby from Howard County Council. So we've heard a lot about how we have housing needs and energy needs today. And one of my concerns is if counties continue the trend of not in my county, whether that's refusing to meet housing needs of residents or refusing to meet our energy generation needs, we're not going to increase our revenues. We are just not. Last year, the governor had a very focused housing bill that specifically looked at transit-oriented developments, which are exactly where many counties target their growth, where they want that growth to go. But the state is really the only entity that can support us in meeting our housing goals and in meeting our energy production goals. So the question is, how will you supportively, collaboratively hold us accountable so we can achieve these goals? Because we really do need to get there, and we won't get there without supportive partners. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. And I'll actually answer this question and the last one all in one fell swoop, because as my colleagues were handling the AI and population question, it was just dawning on, no, the answer is no. I don't like to plan in a very speculative manner like that and again assume that a problem is going to fix itself. I was at a senior's home last night talking about many of these same challenges, and someone said, you don't need to worry about that. Trump's going to totally whack the federal workforce. There's going to be tons of housing coming online. And this was a real belief. But I hear versions of this sort of reason why we don't need to act on some of these problems. And I mean, for years, people have been saying this about energy and climate as reasons not to take action now, right? I mean, so over and over again, when I hear this form of logic, my answer is just no. And so to your point, about Howard County and many of the other counties, I actually think not only is the answer no, that we actually need to have very specific benchmarks for all of these things: energy production, childcare seats production, housing production, and hold all of us, the state, the counties, everyone that has skin in the game on this, accountable for being able to produce what we need. And again, I'm looking at the long-term health of the state. The benchmark level is not current population. It has to be current population plus X. We need to be growing the state population and to be putting enough of these things online that we are able to achieve that. So again, I think I've heard the governor and his team and Secretary Day are working on some things to that effect in the housing arena. But again, as we look to the energy generation question, the problems look much the same to me as they do in childcare and any number of areas where we're facing shortages that are going to get worse if we don't do anything. So many times when I have this conversation with the county partners, I also say, should we do a little wink, wink, nod, nod here? And the state intervenes. Is this helpful? Is this not helpful? I'm very familiar, again, in Montgomery, my own county, and many other places. A lot of folks don't want many of these projects that we're talking about near them. And so that's not unique to any one of our counties. It's going to be true every single place in the state. But we can all see the collective problem that this generates if we don't step in. So I think you're sort of catching the message from my opening remarks. Hopefully this is collaborative. And if it's not collaborative, perhaps we'll at least give you cover for some of these decisions. So I hope that's helpful.
Anybody else? A lot of smiles up here. Yeah.
Look, we need more housing. You're right. We need to all work together on it. It's a joint state, local issue. We need to be willing to sort of ask some tough questions about the way we've always been doing things and how to improve it. I think we did that very effectively last year. I think MACo had a seat at the table throughout the housing conversations last year, and a credit to your leadership and a credit to your staff, did a really good job presenting the local point of view. So there's balance, right? Like, we can't build housing everywhere. In my county, I live right up the street from the Montgomery County Agricultural Reserve, which is a jewel. It is a gem, right? We don't want to cover it in housing developments, but we do need to push the envelope a little bit. And that includes in having hard conversations about zoning, which many of your counties are already doing, right? And more credit to you. We need more of that.
I'd have to disagree. I think it's up to the counties to determine where they want to see growth and what they want to see their population be. And when it comes to the housing crisis and where we are with that, don't forget, so many of the reasons why housing is so expensive is because of the policies that have been created by the General Assembly. And I saw Commissioner Porter walk in from Caroline County a little bit earlier. One of the biggest fights we had in Annapolis a number of years ago was the mandate that houses have sprinkler systems. Single-family homes had to have sprinkler systems. Okay, well, that might make sense if you're on public water, but if you're on a well, if you're out in the rural areas and you need to have pumps in order to do that, the cost of these systems went up, drove up houses about $15,000 to $20,000. Not just because a bunch of policymakers in Annapolis decided that that's what you needed and that was what was important. No, we passed laws that say that you have to have in new houses an outlet for electric vehicles. You have to have it. Policymakers say that's a great idea. Let's mandate. So when it comes to the price of housing, I mean, there's no one else to look at except ourselves and the policies that we've created. And I think what's important is, if we want to see housing, rather than legislators in Maryland dictating to other counties where you have to grow, that we maybe need to take a look at the policies that we created that cause housing to be expensive. I was at the Department of Planning for a few years under Governor Ehrlich's administration. And we had talked about Plan Maryland and a centralized, not under Governor Ehrlich, under Governor O'Malley had talked about centralized planning for Maryland, that the state was going to determine, again, where growth was going to be. We've already done that through priority funding areas. We've already said that here are the areas that state would allow resources to go to if you grow in those areas. That's fine. But now to come back and say that that the state feels that the counties need to grow at a rate that the counties might not want to, I think that's inappropriate. And I think that this is something that, as we look at housing, there are other ways to resolve the housing crisis and the problems that we have, but it's not by the state mandating that that each county needs to grow at a certain rate.
Good morning. I'm Mindy Lehman with TEDCO, and I just want to thank you for being here and thank MACo for putting on this incredible session. And one of the things we focus on at TEDCO is that innovative economic growth and really growing Maryland startup companies, but then supporting them so they can grow from a startup to a small business and then a medium-sized business. And one of the real success stories that we've seen is Rooster Bio out of Frederick. And one of the things we were able to support that from a nascent company with our stem cell research funds, but then they worked with FITCI. And they were able, through that county resource, really grow. And they're an incredible success story, going from 3 to 33 employees with $1 million in revenue. They decided to build a manufacturing plant in Frederick, and they're a terrific success story. So my question is, Senator Hershey and Eric Luedtke, you both mentioned sort of on the economic development side, Senator Zucker talking about the capital budget bill. Are there plans, when we look at growing companies, those shared manufacturing spaces, those shared sort of incubators, places that are extraordinarily expensive to build for like a small company, but if you can rent space, if you can do things like that, I just wondered if there are plans working with the counties to build out more of those types of assets to help juice and spark our economy in Maryland in a way that grows private business.
Minnie, can you hear me? Great. Okay. Well, thank you for the question. I think, one of the things that's important for you all to take away from this is the governor puts forth the capital budget, and the Maryland General Assembly is going to modify it. And a lot of the way that we approach the Maryland state capital budget is based on what the priorities are of the counties and of those elected officials within those jurisdictions. So if there are areas, whether it's Western Maryland, the Eastern Shore, that you see these opportunities present themselves, let us know. Let the administration know. Let my colleagues in the House and the Senate know. Let me know where we can provide these kind of partnerships. The way the capital budget works is if you're going to be going into space, you either have to own it or lease it for more than 15 years. Especially if we're going to be using general obligation bonds debt that we take out. It needs a 15-year life expectancy. Now, I know that we probably throw debt around as a bad word. That actually helps toward our AAA bond rating, our capacity to maintain debt. We're going to be the Spending Affordability Committee. That's a joint committee of House and Senate leadership, especially on the budget committees. We'll be meeting next week about establishing our debt affordability limits, and the expectation is that we'll continue, as we always have, is to be under our debt affordability limits, way within the bounds of those. So, Minnie, in short, if there's opportunities that you think we can partner with you and the counties on these kind of joint ventures that'll help stir economic growth, please count us as partners.
Yeah, thanks. Mindy, thank you again for all your efforts at TEDCO, and obviously that is a very important organization that helps with economic development and job creation in the state of Maryland. One of the things I get concerned about is that we do put a large effort into incubating companies and getting them to grow, but there obviously are a lot of well-established companies that are here in Maryland as well. Last night, the governor talked about, a new focus on life sciences, cyber and IT, and aerospace as the industries that he wants to see grow. But one of the concerns I see that is in my eyes, very apparent is that the state awards a lot of contracts as well, too. And there ought to be a focus on Maryland businesses. If we're using taxpayer dollars to fund programs and work that the state needs, shouldn't we be focusing on Maryland companies? And I don't mean to the extent that if Maryland company is more expensive, then we have to go with them. But there should be some type of prioritization of that. And one of the two recent examples, the comptroller just had to have a brand new IT and data infrastructure system. It was a revitalization. We passed law to make sure that comes up to date. $72 million project management organization contract went to a company in McLean, Virginia. Is there nobody in Maryland that could do this work? You know, we just had just before that, a PMO contract regarding healthcare and things that would go on in the Department of Health. 5 different companies were selected, over $80 million in contracts, and only one of them was a company in the state of Maryland. So I think we need to put a focus on that as well, too. If we are going to make investments in organizations and companies, that we ought to find a way that Maryland businesses are able to participate. The governor mentioned that Maryland was had a ranking for one of the top state with regards to minority businesses. So if we could do a classification that has us looking at minority businesses and making sure that they are getting work, I think that we ought to be able to also take a look and find out how Maryland businesses can participate in the services that we need as well, too.
We got time for one more question. I don't know where Drew is with the mic. There she is. Okay.
Hi, I'm Heather Tonelli from the Queen Anne's County, and I focus on economic and tourism development. And this week, I've heard a lot about growth and economic development, which is awesome. It's certainly job security for those of us in the economic development field. And I think I can speak for all of my fellow economic developers in that we're up for the challenge. However, also today, and through the year, we've heard that Maryland is not very competitive. And when companies are coming to look at us, they see the higher tax rates and they're going down south, or we're not as business friendly as we would like to be. And I know we're going to work on that. And during the challenging times with the budget, many times the incentives that we have, that the current state incentives that we have, are looked at and sometimes, sunsetted or not supported, especially the enterprise zone and job creation tax credit. With the fiscal challenges that you're facing, do you see our legislators looking at those incentives and potentially stopping them, or are there new policies or any new innovative incentives that you're looking at to try to help us as we go out and try to grow the economy?
Softball for the last question.
Yeah, that was a softball. That's great. That's yeah. So I think Maryland's legislature does a better job than most states in the country looking at its programs. They're periodic. Now, you hear complaints about it from the industry. And I think I heard that a little bit from you about the automatic sunsets that are in some of those programs. Senator Hershey mentioned going back to the Augustine Commission earlier. That was actually one of the recommendations of the Augustine Commission, that the legislature periodically study economic development incentives to make sure they're working the way that they should. And, the legislature has done that. They have, the House and Senate both have at times modified programs, a couple times sunset programs. So, that work is ongoing. I think where the legislature and the executive branch could use help from local economic developers is in feedback about what you're actually hearing on the ground and what's most effective for you in terms of helping to recruit businesses. And, whether the types of incentives that are available are adequate to your need. And I will point out, I think there's sometimes a disconnect between what local economic developers experience and what we're hearing in Annapolis in terms of analyses and studies on these programs. The enterprise zone is a good example. There's very little peer-reviewed research. There's very little data that suggests that the enterprise zone program is actually sort of worth the money we're putting into it, that it's having the type of economic growth impact that I think promoters of the program have argued for, or have argued it does. So the question then is, are you seeing something different on the ground that's not being picked up in that data? Or do you agree, in which case, can we take the money that's going into the enterprise zone program from both counties and the state and figure out how to invest it in programs that are more effective? Those are the types of ongoing conversations that we need to have. But it really, I used to be the chair of the subcommittee in the House that dealt with these economic development programs. And it was relatively rare that I had a local economic developer come in and say, here's what's working for me and here's what's not. I think we need a lot more of those types of conversations.
All right. I want to thank everybody for coming out and supporting our panel this morning. And I also want to give one more round of applause for our panelists.